programme and we believe in the data, isn't the logic that if the data shows we can move to free up sectors of the economy sooner, we should not artificially hold them back? Surely that's following the data. Shouldn't there be a little more flexibility there?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we need to see, Madam Deputy Speaker, we need to see the data, we need to see the effect of each successive relaxation, and as I explained to the House, we need 4 weeks to assess whether or not the relaxation has caused a surge in the virus, because that's the time it takes. So from the unlocking of the opening of schools until the 12th of April, we'll need to assess that. Then we'll need a further week to give people due notice, and the same onward through May the 17th, June the 21st, and so on. And the reason for that cautious but irreversible approach is that I think people would rather have certainty rather than urgency. And we're going as fast as we reasonably and responsibly can, but if it's a trade-off between haste and certainty, I think people would prefer certainty.
Now going to Tracy Brabin. Tracy Brabin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Prime Minister will appreciate parts of my constituency and others in West Yorkshire have been in heightened restrictions and higher tiers since last summer, when others had much more freedoms. Our people and businesses have paid a disproportionately high price in the national effort to tackle COVID. And because of this, many areas are building back from a more challenging position. So can the Prime Minister confirm today that funding packages will address this specific inequality and that there will be no return to regional tiers, ensuring our recovery from COVID is truly a national recovery?
Prime Minister.
Yes, she should wait to see what the Chancellor says next week, and we will make sure that we go forward as a one nation together.
William Ragg.
Madam Deputy Speaker, could I congratulate all of the staff and volunteers, particularly at the Boston Moor Surgery in Offerton in my constituency, where I had the privilege of joining them as a marshal for the car park on Friday afternoon as they administered over 500 vaccines. And my right honourable friend says that he is led by the data and not the dates, yet his statement outlines many dates. So will he commit to publishing the thresholds of data that will determine the easing of lockdown measures?
Prime Minister.
Yes, indeed, he can examine all the data that we've published today, and I've set out the criteria by which we will proceed. And I thank him for what he's doing to marshal people in the car parks.
We now go to Christina Rees. Christina Rees.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. On the 18th of February, the UK Government announced £18.5 million for 4 research projects to better understand the causes, symptoms and treatment of long COVID. However, the linkage between sepsis and COVID and long sepsis and long COVID, as evidenced by the UK Sepsis Trust, was not mentioned. Would the Prime Minister please outline his plans to make sure that this very important linkage will be included in these research projects?
Prime Minister.
Of course we will look at sepsis, which I know is a deeply distressing condition, and whether it has any association with COVID.
We now move to Kate Griffiths. Kate Griffiths.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Prime Minister for setting out these measures today, and I know everyone is keen to start socialising in a safe way as soon as possible. Can I ask the Prime Minister to allow pubs to reopen their gardens as quickly as possible? If 6 people can buy alcoholic drinks from a shop and meet in a park, then I hope that pubs will be given a chance to provide a takeaway service for consumption in their gardens as soon as possible.
Prime Minister.
Yes, indeed, and that's why April the 12th is the date.
Christian Matheson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Last month was the worst on record for new aircraft orders in the aerospace sector, which is so important to my constituency. along with tourism, travel and aviation, as we've heard, will suffer a long time after these restrictions are lifted. So will the Prime Minister commit to continuing support for those areas of the economy that drive so much of the value in the economy, but will suffer from a much longer lag before they're able to pick up again?
Prime Minister.
He's quite right. That's why we've done everything we can with Time to Pay and other means to try to look after the aviation sector, though it's been incredibly hard for that sector, which matters a great deal to our country. The best way forward for them is to get people flying again. As I've said, I know it's a bit of time to wait, but the Travel Task Force will be reporting on April the 12th, and I'm hopeful that we'll be able to make progress this summer, but we'll have to wait and see.
Now go to Bill Wiggin. Bill Wiggin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As an animal welfare champion, I was delighted to hear the Prime Minister mention zoos. But before we can get out there and go to the pubs and visit these places, I heard him describe certainty being more important than urgency, and his concern for the unprotected, unvaccinated element of the population who potentially could be holding the rest of us back. What more can we do to encourage people who might not have taken up the vaccine to make sure they get jabbed and let the rest of us out?
Prime Minister.
I'm grateful. Of course, we must encourage everybody to take the vaccine, which, as I say, is a wonderful thing. One of the problems is that it's at the moment we're not, as he knows, vaccinating children. Children are not approved for the vaccine, and though they are possible vectors of the disease, and there are people, as my honourable friend knows, who are vulnerable to the disease, even though they may have been vaccinated. There will be at least a percentage. So we've got to make sure we proceed with caution, but in a way that we don't have to go back on.
Now move to Drew Hendry. Drew Hendry.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Does the Prime Minister and his government intend to do anything at all for the 3 million or so people who've been excluded from financial support since the start of this pandemic?
Prime Minister.
We've provided about £15 billion for the self-employed, and we'll continue to look after them in any way we can.
Now moving to Craig Tracy. Craig Tracy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I welcome Prime Minister setting out this roadmap as promised. And it's great to see that schools will be returning, including importantly with their sporting activities. But with this in mind, the 8th of March would also have been the optimum time to reintroduce for everyone non-contact sports, such as golf, which is scientifically proven to be able to be participated in safely during the pandemic. So could the Prime Minister set out why it's not been possible to do this at this stage, as it will leave millions of people having to wait for another 5 weeks before they can return to their favourite form of exercise?
Prime Minister.
My honourable friend is quite right to vent his frustration. I share his frustration as somebody who yearns to go out and play sport. Myself, I understand completely how he feels. We must face the fact that the virus remains, by comparison with any period last year, the virus remains very prevalent in our country. And we have to continue to keep it under control. What we're trying to do is a cautious but irreversible approach, and he only has to wait for another 3 weeks beyond March the 8th to be able to hit a golf ball with a friend, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Now moving to Emma Lewell-Buck. Emma Lewell-Buck.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Prime Minister's handling of this pandemic has been marked by false promises and inconsistent messaging. Hospitality was COVID secure, yet they were imposed with an arbitrary curfew, then closed down. And today, this industry, which is the lifeblood of coastal tourist towns like mine, have heard that people can meet outside in a park, yet outdoor areas of safe, regulated pubs, bars and restaurants can't open till April. They simply cannot see the logic behind this. Can the Prime Minister explain where he found it?
Prime Minister.
The logic, Madam Deputy Speaker, it lies in containing a pandemic. And I think people in this country understand that. But I deeply sympathise with the businesses in her constituency, the wonderful hospitality sector across the country. They have a date now to work for, to look forward to for outdoor hospitality and for indoor hospitality. And I think people would rather have certainty than anything else.
Moving to Raymond Chisty. Raymond Chisty.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Further to my question to the Prime Minister, on the 27th of January, and representations from Medway MPs. Medway will now have a mass vaccination centre, and I thank the Prime Minister and the government for that. The impact of COVID-19 on the mental health and well-being of young people has been repeatedly raised with me by local schools and the local university. The Children's Commissioner, Anne Longfield, has suggested that all schools should have a dedicated mental health worker in schools. Is that something that the government will be looking to take forward, or will there be specific alternative support for young people? And with that, I thank the Prime Minister for his recent response to me with regards to the report I sent him from Professor Young at King's College London on mental health and COVID-19.
Prime Minister.
I'm congratulate him on the people at Raynham on the vaccine centre and everything that they're doing. On mental health, he's completely right to raise it, but that's why we've were investing massively in supporting children's and adult mental health. And I've recently appointed Alex George to be a mental health ambassador for young people.
Chairmanjit Singh Desi.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. As the Prime Minister charts his roadmap out of this third national lockdown, undoubtedly he has presided over a disastrous response to the pandemic, one of the worst in the world, wherein the sluggishness, double-mindedness and mixed messaging has led to billions of pounds of taxpayer money going into crony contracts to firms with links to the Tory party. We've got one of the worst major economic crises in the world of any major economy, and the worst death toll within Europe, wherein more than 100,000 people have died, including members of my family. So would the Prime Minister like to take this opportunity to apologise to the British people and reassure them that the steps that he is now taking will not lead us into yet another lockdown?
Prime Minister.
The purpose of this roadmap is to be cautious but irreversible. And if I take it from what he just said, that he supports that roadmap, then I'm glad to have his support.
We now go to Martin Vickers. Martin Vickers.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I fully support my right honourable friend's cautious approach to the lockdown. However, you will know that coastal resorts have been particularly badly hit, as they rely to a considerable extent on the hospitality sector. That said, Northern Lincolnshire and the Humber can play a major part in the post-pandemic economic recovery. Can the Prime Minister give an assurance that the government will continue to support both established and new businesses in the area?
Prime Minister.
Yes, indeed, we will make sure that we support businesses throughout the pandemic, and I'm absolutely certain that the hospitality industry in Cleethorpes and surrounding area will bounce back very strongly indeed.
Lambos, Chair Lambos.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Prime Minister in his statement indicated that wearing face masks will still be a factor in the fight against COVID over the months ahead. Yet many people with hidden disabilities are unable to wear face masks, and yet many of them face abuse when they go out in public and people don't realise that they're exempt from wearing face coverings. So can the Prime Minister give a commitment to have a public awareness campaign for people with hidden disabilities so they don't face abuse in public?
Prime Minister.
He raises a very important point, and I will make sure that we do even more to get that point over to people, so that people who can't wear face masks because of their disabilities don't face that kind of abuse.
Now go to Sir John Redwood. Sir John.
Will the government do more to improve airflow and control and extraction in health settings and make more safe use of powerful ultraviolet cleaners to reduce cross-infection further?
Prime Minister.
My honourable friend raises a very interesting point. I know that our scientific advisors are looking at everything we can do, including the means he suggests, in order to reduce transmission of the disease.
Now go to Stephen Bonner. Stephen Bonner.
Thanks, Madam Deputy Speaker. Scientific research from leading Scottish universities has today shown substantial reductions in serious COVID-19 hospital admissions following administration of the first dose of the vaccine. Given this success, does the Prime Minister not agree with me? It is now time to prioritise critical public servants, such as our teachers and other key workers, to ensure maximum protections are in place as we begin to ease our way out of this lockdown.
Prime Minister.
I think that most people in this House would agree, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the JCVI was right in their prioritisation of those who are most vulnerable, and that our ambition in the vaccine rollout programme should be to vaccinate, firstly, those who are most at risk of serious disease and death, and that is the right approach.
Moving to Andrew Bowie. Andrew Bowie.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome my right honourable friend's statement this afternoon and very much hope that it is matched by the First Minister's statement to the Scottish Parliament tomorrow, because it is better for business, not least the tourism and hospitality sector, that the whole country moves at the same pace. In that vein, does the Prime Minister agree with me that the incredible success pace and take-up of the vaccine just shows what this country can achieve when we do it together?
Prime Minister.
He is completely right. My honourable friend is completely right. It's been a stunning example of the whole of the UK working together to roll out a programme that's been absolutely vital for our whole country. And cooperation with the DAs has been terrific on this, but it's something that could not have been achieved without the UK working together.
Moving to Stephen Kinnock. Stephen Kinnock.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Prime Minister should know that there can be no post-pandemic economic recovery without a strong and healthy UK steel industry. But he should also know that our steel workers are having to compete with one hand tied behind their backs because our electricity costs our steelmakers 86% more than Germany and 62% more than in France. What steps will the Prime Minister be taking to reduce British electricity costs to internationally competitive levels so that our steel industry can thrive in the wake of this pandemic?
Prime Minister.
He raises a very important point, and of course that was one of the consequences of the some of the taxes and some of the skewing of the prices that have been chosen over many years by government. We want to make sure that we have a steel industry in this country that is able to compete, and that we must indeed address the discriminatory costs of energy. He's completely right to raise it.
Just a quick reminder, this is about the COVID statement. So we now move to Andrew Selous.
Thank you very much on behalf of Whipsnade Zoo. But will the Prime Minister now instruct that a further test case be taken to the courts so that those hospitality businesses whose business interruption insurance is still not paying out can get the relief that they need, having paid thousands in premiums for decades in some cases?
Prime Minister.
I do hope that the businesses concerned receive the compensation that they are owed and deserve from their insurance packages. But in the meantime, I would just urge him to look out for what the Chancellor is going to say next week by way of continued support.
Now go to Naz Shah. Naz Shah.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I do welcome the roadmap that has been put before the House this afternoon, certainly because Bradford has had extra restrictions since July. And my question really to the Prime Minister is, he has outlined that hospitality, the industry, will be open by the 12th of April, but wedding industry won't be till June the 21st at the larger venues. That's another 10 weeks for some businesses. That 10 weeks could be the difference between closure and bankruptcy. And we have some amazing wedding venues in Bradford. It's a big part of our industry here. And they can open like restaurants with 2 meters apart. So I'd urge the Prime Minister to reconsider whether we could look at wedding venues being opened sooner. And I would invite him to come and look at some of our amazing wedding venues in Bradford West. We have so many beautiful ones.
Thank you. Prime Minister.
Well, I'm very happy to take up her invitation to visit the beautiful wedding venues of Bradford. I know they have an extraordinary, they do an amazing job there. But just an answer to her point, we can't do full Cecil B. DeMille weddings earlier than June the 21st. We can do smaller weddings before then, as she knows, but at least the great businesses she talks about now have a date to think about and to aim for.
Richard Fuller.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I thank the Prime Minister for his statement, and in particular the inclusion of dates that help businesses plan. But with respect to international travel, the inside page of our passport states that in the name of Her Majesty, all those whom it may concern, to allow the bearer to pass freely without let or hindrance. And with regard to quarantine hotels, may I remind the Prime Minister that just because a policy is popular does not mean it is right.
Prime Minister.
I have a high regard for my honourable friend, who I've known for many years, and I know he speaks for many in our party and beyond in what he says. These are very difficult judgments to make, as I know he appreciates. But I think that it is right when you're facing a pandemic like this and the risk of new variants to have a very tough borders and quarantine policy indeed.
Now move to Janet Davey. Janet Davey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Prime Minister has been asked several times about how the government procured contracts during this pandemic. My question to the Prime Minister is slightly different, and if there are any plans for the government to claw back on any of the funds on pandemic contracts that have failed, for example, delivering unusable or unsafe PPE at the great expense of the taxpayer.
Prime Minister.
99.5% of the PPE that we have received has been of a high standard, but of course where people have fallen down on their contracts, we will claw back the money that we've paid.
Now move to Paul Bristow. Paul Bristow.
I want to congratulate our NHS and my right honourable friend for the great British success story that is the vaccination programme. Because the UK is ahead of others on vaccination, we can open up sooner. My right honourable friend said he would focus on data, not dates. But these 5-week dates seem arbitrary. If progress against the 4 tests look better than expected, might the government be flexible and review the data and restrictions on a weekly or fortnightly basis and not on predetermined dates?
Prime Minister.
These not before dates aren't arbitrary, they're crucial, and they're determined by the time you need to evaluate the impact on the pandemic of the openings up that we're doing. And so you need 4 weeks to see, for instance, whether the opening of schools has caused an uncontrollable surge in the pandemic, and then a week to give advice and so on. So they're not arbitrary, they're dictated by the science, and that is the right way forward. But if you look at the overall roadmap, it is, I think, beyond what many other countries are currently able to achieve, and that, as he rightly says, is thanks to the rollout of the vaccination programme.
Moving to Andy Slaughter. Andy Slaughter.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. 5 local NHS areas in England, including Hammersmith and Fulham, have vaccinated 73% or less of the over 70s, despite the very best efforts of NHS and public health staff and volunteers. This falls to a 60% take-up for the most deprived 10th residents and below 50% for some ethnic minority groups. As the country moves on to vaccinate younger and less at-risk groups, what comfort can the Prime Minister give to the quarter of my elderly, vulnerable constituents that his government have left behind?
Prime Minister.
Take-up is accelerating actually amongst all those groups, but he's right to say that it's been slower in some groups than others, and that's why we've rolled out the network of community champions. But it's also important for him and for all of us ourselves to champion the uptake of vaccines across all our communities in our constituencies.
Now moving to Mike Wood. Mike Wood.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
The vaccine rollout has been more successful than even the most optimistic of us could have predicted in December. And while the Prime Minister is clearly right to insist that this roadmap must be irreversible so that we don't risk a further lockdown, will he make sure that if vaccinations prove to be as effective as we all hope, the government can still continue to review whether later stages might progress more quickly as long as the number of deaths and hospital admissions continue to fall?
Prime Minister.
He makes a very interesting point, which I'm sure that will have occurred to many other colleagues and to people up and down the country. I've given the reason for the interval between the dates that I've set out, and why we need to be able to be certain about the impact of the relaxations that we're making, the 4 weeks plus one that we need. But the other point I would make, because he makes a very interesting point, the other point I would make is I think people would much rather have a date that they know is as certain at this stage as we can possibly be, to fix on and to work towards, rather than more uncertainty and fluidity than we need.
61 withdrawn, so we go to James Wild. James.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Last week I met Kathy, the practice manager, and the team including volunteers at St James Medical Practice, who vaccinated thousands of people in northwest Norfolk. Will my honourable friend join with me in paying tribute to them and those other sites in Kings Lynn and Snettisham who are making it possible to reopen our hospitality sector, albeit more slowly than some would want, as well as, very importantly, reopening our schools and other businesses in the coming weeks?
Prime Minister.
Yes, I do. And I thank everybody involved in the vaccination programme in Northwest Norfolk, and I thank my honourable friend for championing the vaccinators.
We go to Alison Thewlis. Alison Thewlis.
Thank you very much. The APPG gaps in support heard evidence last week on how tens of thousands of women have been forgotten about during this pandemic. So will the Prime Minister meet with the Maternity Action, Pregnant Then Screwed, Bethany Power and Snala Joshi to hear how he can redress the balance and how he can redress the unfairness that those who were pregnant and on maternity leave have faced during the pandemic?
Prime Minister.
She raises an important point. I'll certainly make sure that the relevant minister receives such a delegation.
Now move to Julian Sturdy. Julian Sturdy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In view of the Prime Minister's sensible commitment to act on the basis of data, not data, which I fully support, can he clarify if there is scope and flexibility in his roadmap to go faster in relaxing restrictions if the vaccination programme proceeds more rapidly than expected and the data shows enhanced effectiveness of the vaccine as more of that data comes forward, resulting in radically reduced transmission and hospital admissions? Surely, if we're following the data, that flexibility has to work both ways.
Prime Minister.
This is all. I'm very grateful to my honourable friend. This is already a very fast unlocking programme by other international standards. The timetable is dictated, as I've explained, by the intervals we need to evaluate the effect of each successive lockdown. And I think what people want to see, what businesses want, is as much certainty as possible rather than uncertainty. And that's what we aim to provide.
Going to Ben Bradshaw. Ben Bradshaw.
Forgive me, Madam Deputy Speaker. I didn't hear the Prime Minister's reply just then because one of the Zoom operators was talking to another member. But the Prime Minister is absolutely right to say that we should be driven by the data and not dates, and that his dates are therefore subject to review. But given the stunning success of the vaccination programme, with the evidence today of how it prevents serious illness and death, why is he not prepared to bring his dates forward as well as back if the data justifies that?
Prime Minister.
He didn't hear my answer to the last question, so I'll repeat it because his question is really identical to several previous questions. The answer is that you need time to evaluate the success or otherwise of each lockdown, of each unlocking. and you need 4 weeks to see what's happened. And bear in mind, Madam Deputy Speaker, that we are dealing with a disease that is extremely contagious, and large numbers of people who are still unvaccinated and still very vulnerable. So we have to proceed with caution. So that's why there's the interval, the 4-5 week interval that we have. And the second reason is that we want a timetable that we can stick to. And I think people would really much rather have a sense of certainty and security, the maximum possible certainty and security, rather than any sense that it's fluid again, and they could move one way, or the date they have in their heads could change. And I think that is very, very important. Certainty in this particular case, in this particular roadmap, is of great value.
66 withdrawn, so we go to Geraint Davis. Geraint Davis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Prime Minister, in Wales, excess deaths over the 5-year average are 13% more compared to 20% more in England. So will the Prime Minister ensure on the UK government website that it says if you live in more highly infectious areas of England, you should not travel to Wales?
Prime Minister.
The restrictions throughout the country apply both in England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. They will continue to apply for the duration of the pandemic.
Moving to Robert Halfon. Robert Halfon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I really welcome the Prime Minister's statement, which will give certainty to businesses and constituents in Harlow. And it's really good news about school reopenings on the 8th of March. Given that so many children have lost months of school, impacting their education attainment and mental health, will he ensure that every pupil is assessed for their loss of learning and how much catch-up is needed? And will he consider extending the school day, not by putting an extra burden on teachers and support staff, but by using civil society to offer sporting activities, mental health support and academic catch-up where necessary?
Prime Minister.
I thank my right honourable friend. That's exactly why I've appointed Sir Kevin Collins to be the Educational Recovery Commissioner, to champion all those ideas, all those initiatives that he's just rightly mentioned, and he'll be hearing more about that all later this week.
Now going to Joanna Cherry. Joanna Cherry.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. While the government's announcement that indoor care home visiting for one named person, one named relative, is to be permitted from 8th March, while that sounds like progress, the fact that this remains a matter for guidance only is very concerning. The Joint Committee on Human Rights has heard too many examples of previous guidance on this issue not being followed, denying meaningful visits when these might safely be facilitated. The Joint Committee has drafted regulations that would ensure that nobody in a care home was denied a face-to-face visit without a carefully thought-through, individualised risk assessment. Will the Prime Minister commit to bringing these regulations into force?
Prime Minister.
Well, I just direct the right honourable lady to what I said earlier on about ensuring that people do get the ability to see a nominated visitor, and also to remind her of the sad reality of the infection that we've seen in care homes and the need to protect against it. There is a balance to be struck, as she knows.
Richard Holden.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Prime Minister for his statement. Everyone, especially young people, small businesses in the hospitality and pub sector in North West Durham, but across the country, have made massive sacrifices to achieve the huge progress in tackling the pandemic. As long as the government's world-leading vaccine programme continues, the roadmap means we'll now be off almost restrictions by late June with that certain approach the Prime Minister is pushing for. Therefore, can I extend to him an invitation to the Prime Minister's fiancée Carrie, Wilfred and Dylan to visit North West Durham this summer to see some of Britain's most beautiful but least well-known countryside?
I thank my honourable friend. I can't. Wild horses wouldn't keep me away from North West Durham. I can tell him that.
We now go to Asfal Khan. Asfal Khan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Earlier this month, nearly half of constituents I surveyed reported severe levels of financial insecurity. Shockingly, almost a third also said they struggle to afford daily living costs. This is the financial reality of millions around the country. One respondent told me that they feel hopeless, utterly hopeless about their financial situation. The Prime Minister could now deliver some peace of mind for my constituents by agreeing to extend the support schemes that have kept many families afloat during this crisis. This includes expanding payments for people self-isolating. Will he do so?
Prime Minister.
We'll continue to look after people throughout the pandemic.
Jacob Young.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Our vaccine rollout so far has been an amazing success, and I want to thank those at Eston PCN, Redcar Hospital, James Cook and the government for their efforts in delivering it. We're hitting targets and reaching new milestones each day, and soon we will have the Novavax vaccine made in Teesside to help us as well. Can I ask the Prime Minister when he expects this new Teesside vaccine to be approved by the MHRA?
I was thrilled to go up to Teesside and to see the site where the Novavax vaccine will be made, and in fact to look at one of the bioreactors that will be used. I can't give an exact date by which the MHRA will give approval, but we're pretty confident, Madam Deputy Speaker, that it will be forthcoming before too long.
Now going to Graham Morris. Graham Morris.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Is the Prime Minister aware of the Catch Up with Cancer campaign and the urgent need for funding to clear the cancer backlog? Otherwise, we risk turning the COVID crisis into a cancer crisis with tens of thousands more lives lost. Will he commit to the funding to create a world-class cancer service and work with the Catch Up with Cancer campaign to deliver the investment we need in the cancer workforce, in new equipment, and in the IT networks that we urgently need to tackle this backlog?
Prime Minister.
Yes, and he makes a very important point. That's why we're investing, I think, an extra £52 billion into the NHS, but also tackling the backlog caused by the pandemic in cancer and many other conditions. And I think the point that he makes should be attended to by all those who think that it is somehow that another wave of COVID is something we can simply put up with easily. Madam Deputy Speaker, the NHS is already under terrific pressure, and the more COVID we have, the more it displaces other vital treatments, as he rightly points out.
Now moving to Ben Bradley. Ben Bradley.
This morning I visited the Manor Academy in Mansfield Woodhouse to see the amazing job they've done setting up COVID testing for pupils and staff. They're very keen to see their children back in school, as they know the inequalities that existed pre-COVID will only have been exacerbated by closures. So can my right honourable friend assure the House that wide-ranging support will be offered to schools to address not just academic issues, but the social and emotional challenges that many children will face as a result of those closures?
Prime Minister.
Yes, and one of the most important things I think you can do is not just supporting kids' mental health and addressing those issues, helping teachers to address them, but also investing in one-on-one tutoring that I think could be of massive value to kids who've come under particular stress, kids who've fallen behind, but also kids who may show great potential that needs to be unleashed. And so one-to-one tutoring is something we're going to be investing in heavily.
Moving to Dr. Rupa Huq. Rupa Huq.
Madam Deputy Speaker, to add to the various helter-skelter of pending cliff edge dates, stamp duty, eviction ban, business rates, UC, furlough, one ended yesterday, a little-known one, when the 4 months of free vitamin D supplied to the shielding, the expiry date to claim, ended. Can you tell us, will the 1.7 new shielders just added to the list be eligible for this? Can he advertise it more widely? And indeed, given how vitamin D builds immunity to all viruses, even for people who are not yet eligible for their vaccination, can he commit to a year-long advertising campaign for all? Kellogg's are on board. Will he do it?
Minister.
I thank her very much for what she says about vitamin D. I think she's right about the value that vitamin can have, and we'll make sure that we give it due publicity.
Moving to Mark Menzies. Mark Menzies.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I would like to welcome the Prime Minister's statement today and also to acknowledge the tremendous leadership that he has shown in driving forward the vaccine programme. But as my right honourable friend is aware, tourism and hospitality sectors are vital to the foiled economy, and they are ready and willing to trade their way to recovery. Can my right honourable friend assure me that he will keep this sector at the front of his thoughts, both ahead of next week's budget and when implementing his roadmap?
Prime Minister.
The tourism sector is absolutely vital for our country, and the faster we can get it open, the better. But the best way to open it up the fastest is to have a roadmap from which we don't deviate and on which we're not forced to go backwards. And that's what we're setting out to do. I'm glad we have his support.
Going to Ruth Cadbury. Ruth Cadbury.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Prime Minister has today both acknowledged the importance of holidays abroad, but also that strict quarantine is essential to address global transmission of COVID. The aviation sector has estimated that at best, aviation will only return in the UK to a third of 2019 levels this year, and full recovery could take 5 years. So when will the government be releasing their delayed aviation recovery plan? And what additional support will the government be providing for communities like mine and like the Prime Minister's who are very dependent on the aviation sector for employment?
Prime Minister.
She'll be hearing a lot more about that and other matters on April the 12th.
Moving to Dr. James Davis. Dr. James Davis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My right honourable friend has quite rightly placed an emphasis on the reopening of schools, with a return to school of all children in England on the 8th of March. In Wales, primary school children aged 7 and under will return this week, while it's hoped that the remainder of primary school children and some older pupils taking qualifications may return on the 15th of March. However, there appear to be no plans for most secondary school pupils to return in Wales until after Easter, potentially beyond the reopening of some non-essential shops. Will the Prime Minister urge the Welsh Government to reconsider its approach, given the harm that young people have already endured during this pandemic?
Minister.
Well, thank my honourable friend. Obviously, that is a matter for the devolved authority, but I'm sure he shares my hope that all pupils will be back in school as fast as possible, and that we'll hear from the Labour Party in Wales that schools are safe.
Moving to Maria Eagle. Maria Eagle.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In Liverpool, only 23% of those who applied for test, trace and isolate payment received it, and over 2/5 of them received a discretionary payment from money which is now exhausted. Now, effectively facilitating isolation is going to be key in preventing the resurgence of the virus via new strains, which might compromise the vaccine. So does the Prime Minister accept that eligibility for the test, trace and isolate payment is not drawn widely enough to provide support to those who need it and who can't afford to stop work without extra help? And will he agree to extend it to include all of those people who have no access to statutory sick pay?
Prime Minister.
We will continue to support all those who are isolating. Indeed, we will do what we can to increase our support for them, but we will also support everybody throughout this pandemic, and she should wait for the Chancellor and the budget next week.
Steve Bryan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I want to welcome and indeed raise a hallelujah that the good sense, and we're standing with parents and children, that all pupils will return from March the 8th. It's the right thing to do on so many levels. Can I ask the Prime Minister, though, what evidence has driven his decision that outdoor sport, not in-school outdoor sport, wider outdoor sport, for those same children cannot go ahead for at least another month, and after all the good work that they've done last year to create COVID-secure environments, restaurants and cafes face another 3 months before they can open in any meaningful way? What is the evidence that he's seen that's convinced him to make that decision today? Thank you.
Actually, thank my honour. Actually, outdoor sport for schools can go ahead from March the 8th, as I said earlier on, and the evidence for all the decisions that we've taken, a massive quantity of scientific evidence has been deposited today with the House.
We now go to Yvette Cooper. Yvette Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Our COVID rates in Yorkshire have fallen much more slowly than in London and the South East, partly because fewer people can work from home and more people in our towns have to go out to work to keep our factories and distribution centres running. The Prime Minister keeps saying he's supporting self-isolation, but most workers are not getting that support, and that is particularly hitting our manufacturing towns. So will he think again? Will he extend that support, help those workers and help us get our rates down?
Prime Minister.
Thank you. We are indeed increasing our support, as I said, for people who are self-isolating, and continue to look after workers throughout the pandemic. But the best thing for all those businesses is to continue as they're doing in Yorkshire to get the disease down and keep it under control.
I'm afraid we've mislaid Alex Shelbrooke, but we will try to return to him. So we move straight to Vicky Foxcroft.
Deputy Speaker, disabled people have been one of the hardest hit groups during this pandemic. Communication with disabled people and those shielding has been poor. Far too often, communications have been late and not in accessible formats. But the Prime Minister can seek to rectify this now. Will he provide a clear roadmap for those people shielding so they know when it's safe for them to rejoin society?
Prime Minister.
Yes, indeed, and it's here. It's the roadmap that she should have with her now, is online now, and the measures specifically for disabled people, for those shielding, are clearly set out.
Now moving to Simon Clarke. Simon Clarke.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I congratulate my right honourable friend on his sensible and measured statement, just as I echo my honourable friend for Redcar and thanking all those across the Tees Valley involved in the vaccine rollout so far. Children and parents will be delighted that schools across England return on the 8th of March. I fear greatly that white working class children will have borne the brunt in terms of lack of progress in educational attainment during this time. Can I urge a specific focus on targeted support for those young people as we rebuild our country?
Prime Minister.
We will, I'm really grateful, we will support all pupils who've suffered loss to their learning as a result of the pandemic, and that's why I think we've bought 1.3 million laptops. We've now distributed, put another billion and 1.3 billion into catch-up of all kinds. But you know, he's totally right to focus on this. It is, I think, the #1 challenge the country faces now.
Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Our university students, many of whom were not eligible for furlough for their part-time jobs, were already struggling financially. Today's roadmap suggests the vast majority of those students won't be able to return to their university accommodation until after Easter at best. They're legally being prevented from returning to accommodation they're obliged to pay for. Does the Prime Minister think this fair? And if he doesn't think it's fair, what's he going to do about it?
Prime Minister.
I sympathise deeply with students who've had an absolutely, a time at university that no other generation has put up with. I sympathise deeply with their sense of unfairness, the experiences that they've had. They've also been heroic, by the way, in the way that they've been able to bring the disease down in some of their university towns through obeying the guidance. We will do whatever we can to support them, working with the university sector to make up for what the experiences that they've been through, and making sure that insofar as we can, we help them to get compensation.
Mark Fletcher.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I very much welcome the Prime Minister's statement today and a sustainable way out of this situation. And it is absolutely right that we prioritise the reopening of schools and getting all children back into the classroom. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that it is now essential that we work with parents and teachers and schools to develop a long-term plan for pupils to catch up on the education that they have missed out on, particularly in areas like Bolsover?
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and that's why Sir Kevin Collins has been appointed as the Education Recovery Commissioner, and we'll be setting out plans that are intended not just to remediate the loss that kids have suffered during the pandemic, but also to take our educational system forward and to do things that possibly we wouldn't have done before, to find new ways of teaching and learning that will make up the difference for those kids and more.
So we've relocated Alex Shelbrook, so we'll go now to him. Alex Shelbrook.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, in my constituency, there are a lot of strong community events, especially things such as Zumba classes, which I get a lot of emails on. So could I ask my right honourable friend, when does he envisage that indoor activities in village halls and the like for Zumba classes may be allowed to start again?
Prime Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, if you can do outdoor Zumba, then you can, obviously, March the 29th is the date for you. Always assuming you can't do it one-on-one, in which case you could do it earlier. But indoor, as he will have picked up from what I've said earlier, is currently down for May the 17th. May the 17th, along with all other indoor settings.
We now go to Navendu Mishra.
Madam Deputy Speaker, Macmillan Cancer Support has warned that more than 100,000 people live with cancer in the UK are struggling to cover basic living costs due to the impact of COVID-19. Tragically, many cancer patients who are having difficulty paying for essentials have experienced suicidal thoughts in recent months. Will the Prime Minister commit to making the £20 per week universal credit increase permanent and extend this uplift to legacy benefits?
Prime Minister.
He's totally right to raise the issue of cancer patients, other patients who need treatment, and we're going to do everything we can to clear the backlog as fast as we possibly can. That's one of the reasons we've got to keep the COVID virus going down, Madam Deputy Speaker, and he'll be hearing more next week from the Chancellor about supporting people across the country.
Sir Edward Lee.
It seems to me that many of the 88 people who've gone before me and who've been critical of the Prime Minister have been wise after the event. So let me now do precisely that and plead guilty to this charge. If severe quarantine measures from the very start have been so effective as in Australia, and equally if tough local lockdowns have been effective in China, doesn't that rather beg the question why we didn't do it over a year ago? I don't say this to be difficult, but to learn from the future and to ponder on what we should do next time. And I think many people in the country think that it's better to be tough on foreign travel than tough on children attending school.
I think he speaks for many people in the country, my own friend, when he says that we do have a very tough regime on international travel, one of the toughest in the world, and we will certainly be making sure we learn all the lessons we need to about the early handling of the pandemic.
Now go to Kerry McCarthy. Kerry McCarthy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Events and exhibitions companies in my constituency are still struggling to get any support for lost business. The fact that they're not customer facing means they don't get the retail hospitality grant. The fact they haven't actually been forced to close, although they service businesses that have, means that they've lost out on the council's LSRG closed grant. They're not arts organisations as such, so they don't get the Arts Council funding. And the advice and guidance that is being given to local councils about what grants they should be giving to events and exhibition sector is incredibly vague and inconsistent. So what reassurance can the Prime Minister give me that in the Chancellor's budget next week, there will finally be help for those companies like the ones in my constituency that are just absolutely at their last legs?
Prime Minister.
I'm acutely conscious of the businesses that have fallen through the cracks, as it were, Madam Deputy Speaker, wholesalers, for instance, who find it difficult to qualify under one scheme or another. We're doing absolutely everything we can to make sure that we give the support that people want. There's extra discretionary funding available for councils to support such businesses, and she will be hearing more certainly from the Chancellor next week.
Anthony Mangnall.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I welcome the Prime Minister's statement. Millions of young people have had their lives put on hold over the last 13 months. They have been the least likely to suffer severely from this virus. So I wonder if the Prime Minister can look ahead and just inform me and the House as to what we can do to help those university students who are going to enter the job market for the first time, those leaving school. Because right now they look ahead and they look post-lockdown into a world that is very uncertain, and their future must be safeguarded. So what can we do?
He raises a vital point, and that's why we've got the £2 billion kickstart funds in addition to many other schemes to help young people into work, to help them with what could be a very difficult transition. But the best thing possible is to get the economy open and firing again.
Patrick Grady.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The German equivalent of furlough, the Kurzarbeit scheme, will be accessible to employers until at least the end of this year. So given that he said the United Kingdom would prosper mightily outside the European Union, why can't his government provide that level, or why won't his government provide that level of certainty and support to employers on these islands so they can plan with some confidence for a new post-pandemic normal?
He'll be hearing a lot more next week about the support that we're going to give throughout the whole of the UK, and perhaps, while we're on the subject, perhaps he could confirm that the Scottish Nationalist Party would have remained in the European Medicines Agency. I think he's a member of the SNP.
Now go to Peter Bone. Peter Bone.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Last year, a wonderful young couple in my constituency had to cancel their wedding because of COVID. They contacted me this morning so that I could ask the Prime Minister whether he could guarantee their wedding would be able to go ahead on the 1st of July. And if he can, Rhiannon and Jordan will send a wedding invite in the post tonight.
Prime Minister.
I thank my honourable friend. I can't absolutely guarantee that Rhiannon and Jordan's wedding will be able to go ahead on the 1st of July, but if we can stick with this roadmap, and I hope very much that we can, then all is set fair for them, and I hope the sun will shine on them both with or without my presence.
Now go to Zara Sultana. Zara Sultana.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We have more than 120,000 COVID deaths, the highest death rate of any large country in the world, and the deepest recession of any major economy. This is the government's horrific pandemic record. The Prime Minister now claims that he's taken a cautious approach to easing restrictions, but government scientists themselves have warned that the Big Bang reopening of schools on the March the 8th could lead to the infection rate rising above 1, triggering an exponential increase in cases. 9 education unions have described the plans as reckless. So instead of repeating his mistakes, will the Prime Minister listen to teachers and scientists and follow the devolved administrations with a phased return to schools?
Prime Minister.
Well, perhaps she might direct her fire at her own front bench and the Leader of the Opposition, Madam Deputy Speaker, because he's just quite rightly supported those plans. I think she had possibly been failing to pay attention. Oh no, he's withdrawing his support. I told you it was. There you go. We've been barely here 2 hours, Madam Deputy, and it's gone again. 1 minute you have it, the next minute it's gone. Anyway, I thought he was with us on reopening schools, but never mind.
Now go to Robin Miller. Robin Miller.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The success of our North Wales economy is critically dependent on visitors from the rest of the UK and indeed the world. Llandudno is the queen of resorts and is the largest resort in Wales. Our hoteliers are eager to open their arms and offer a warm welcome once again to visitors. Will my right honourable friend continue his good work with the Welsh Government to ensure there are no obstacles put in the way of visitors? And can he also confirm that shared prosperity funds will be used to accelerate an economic recovery in places like Aberconwy?
Prime Minister.
I thought I heard my honourable friend say Llandudno, and I remember spending an absolutely hysterical New Year's Eve in the St Tidno Hotel, I think, in Llandudno, which in 1997, I seem to remember. Absolutely wonderful, wonderful year to be in. And I wish that hotel and all other hotels in Llandudno all the very best, and we'll get them open just as soon as we possibly can. I thank him for his representations.
We now go to Richard Bergen. Richard Bergen.
Madam Deputy Speaker, what the Prime Minister said about a zero COVID solution earlier is simply not true. Since he lifted lockdown prematurely in December, which I voted against, we've had 60,000 deaths compared to fewer than 1,400 deaths across all the countries with a zero COVID plan, despite their populations being 20 times bigger. Those unnecessary deaths are on him, and he is still refusing to learn the lessons. Last month, the Prime Minister called schools vectors of transmission, yet he is recklessly forcing 10 million school pupils and staff to return on just one day. Doesn't this run the very real risk of the virus running out of control yet again?
Prime Minister.
Well, this is one of those moments when I sympathise very much with the Leader of the Opposition, because there speaks the authentic voice of the union-dominated Labour left. I don't think that he's right in what he says. I think that most people in this country understand that schools need to go back, and they support it. And I just heard from I just heard from the Right Honourable Gentleman, he does support that on March the 8th, which is good news.
We now go to Alberto Costa. Alberto Costa.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Prime Minister, you've timed step 2 perfectly. Why do I say that? Foss Shopping Park Centre in my constituency, one of Britain's biggest out-of-town shopping centres, has expanded with a £168 million investment, including the flagship Next UK store. Now, it was due to open last year. Obviously, COVID didn't allow that, but it will open just as soon as you allow it to open. Will you do it the honours, come and cut the ribbon, and help boost consumer confidence across our country?
Prime Minister.
Well, non-essential retail, as I've told the House, will be opening on April the 12th. Whether I'm essential to the opening of Foss Park, I doubt, but I'm very grateful to him for the invitation. I'm sure that if I can't get there, he'll do a magnificent job in my place.
We now go to Mohammed Yassin. Mohammed Yassin.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm very concerned about the large numbers of care home staff and black and ethnic minority groups who won't take up the vaccine. MPs and local authorities have been asking his government for weeks to supply the detailed data they need to identify and resolve vaccine non-compliance. As the Prime Minister knows, the vaccine rollout is a race against time. So will he make the data available today so we can ensure enough people take the vaccine to reach the herd immunity necessary to prevent another lockdown?
Prime Minister.
We're making as much data available as we possibly can. Clearly, you can't make people's medical records available because that breaches patient confidentiality. Madam Deputy Speaker, he's right to raise the question of take-up amongst some groups and care home staff. It has been increasing, but we need to all work together to make sure we encourage everybody to come forward and take a vaccine.
Sir Desmond Swain.
Prime Minister raised the possibility of new variants having an impact on the plan. Ordinarily, the laws of natural selection will favour more benign variants. However, lockdown reverses that, favouring the more potent. So in addition to an urgency on the basis of the economic and social costs of lockdown, there is indeed also a scientific urgency to lift it, isn't there?
Well, I defer to my honourable friend's doubtless superior understanding of the biology of the variants. But I just a couple of reassuring points for him. Number one, we think that we have no reason to think that our vaccines are ineffective in preventing death or serious illness against all the variants that we're currently aware of. And the second thing is that we're getting ever better, or our scientists are getting ever better at evolving new vaccines to tackle the new variants.
Now go to Tim Farron. Tim Farron?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Prime Minister is right to focus upon prioritising education and saying that outdoor activities are things that people can now do more freely, or at least will over the coming weeks and months. But he says nothing about outdoor education, which is an industry, is of vast importance to us in the lakes and in the dales, and of great value to young people right across the country. There are 15,000 people employed in this sector, at least there were. 6,000 have now lost their jobs. If we lose that sector, it will be very, very difficult to ever get it back, and we will suffer hugely as a country if that happens. So will he agree to reopen outdoor education for residential stays from the summer term, so that we take advantage of the skills that these people in outdoor education, the professionals there have, to help our young people to re-engage with a love of learning and to tackle many of the mental health issues that we face? And if he's not able to make that guarantee, will he at least do what has happened in Northern Ireland and Scotland and create and provide a bespoke financial package to support and to save our outdoor education sector?
Right, Honourable Gentleman, it's a really interesting point. As you know, indoor education is opening on March the 8th. So given that transmission is much less likely outdoors, I would have thought that a fortiori, outdoor education should be able to open on the same date. But I'll make sure that we get back to him if that should for any reason turn out not to be the case. I can't see why it shouldn't be the case, but we'll get back to him.
Final question, Jason McCartney. Jason McCartney?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And as the owner of one of my local hair salons has just said, the future now looks a little brighter thanks to this roadmap. Will the Prime Minister join me in thanking the wonderful volunteers, GPs, pharmacies and nurses who have helped administer thousands of vaccines in my area? And finally, can he also make sure that the Chancellor announces in his budget support for the wedding, hospitality and event sectors who will have to wait just a little bit longer now before they can fully reopen safely?
Yes, sir.
I think he's caught the tone of it exactly right, that there is just a little bit longer to go now. The Chancellor will be setting out the support that we need to put in place for all the businesses that he mentions. I echo his support and his thanks to them, particularly to hair salons, which I look forward to being able to use without too much delay myself, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Thank the Prime Minister for his statement, and am now suspended. Point of order, Steve Bryan.
Thank you very much for that. The Prime Minister has obviously today outlined a very helpful roadmap for reopening our economy and our society. Can I ask the Chair whether any such plan exists for our House of Commons? The Prime Minister obviously referred to Parliament in his statement. The House of Commons, by any standard, remains a shadow of its former self in terms of the debate that's held, let alone the range and the effectiveness of the scrutiny of the executive, which is after all our job. So can I ask whether any plan exists for our House of Commons and when we might get sight of that?
Well, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for giving notice of his point of order. As he knows, the House's procedures have adapted and continue to adapt in the light of COVID-19. I do understand the points that he makes, but it will be up to the government to bring forward a motion to extend or amend our current arrangements, and I'm sure that ministers, including the Prime Minister, will have heard his comments. So I'm now suspending the House for 3 minutes to make the necessary arrangements for the next business.